Hey guys, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping, and in this video we're going to talk about preserving bread that's already been made. Now, I've told you guys in a past video that I have access to large amounts of baked bread if I can figure out what to do with it. And it's a lot of calories that don't always get used by the local homeless shelter, and which I could be storing either for myself or as a giveaway food item in the future, if I can just figure out how to keep it from molding. Now, I'm not worried about it staling because I can add it to soups or various other things to reconstitute it. Now, I'm not saving the rye bread because that's how you get mass hallucinations. This is just a sourdough-based wheat. It generally tends to dry and crust out rather than mold, and that's a good one for doing a twice-baked or thrice-baked rusk or bruschetta bread recipe with. Now, I'm altering it a bit for food storage rather than for shelf stability and use in a bruschetta recipe. So basically what I'm going to do is chop this down into little bits and then bake the moisture out of it and put some natural things that you'll have at home into it to make it last a bit longer and to fight the mold that will eventually start happening. Now, this is definitely experimental. Pretty much all the preppers that I talked to about this said freezer or nothing. And if you search online for long-term food storage bread, you're going to get links either talking about how to make bread from your food storage flour or articles about the debate about freezer versus fridge. What I want to do is crumb this bread and add some preservatives, some natural preservatives that will make it last for up to a year in Mylar bags and maybe in a cooler to give me something that I can, some free calories to boost my food preps and also as potentially a giveaway food item for other people so I'm not giving away the cream of my crop. So this is an experimental process. In fact, this batch actually I scrapped for a couple of reasons that I'll explain later. But what I'm experimenting with is some vinegar solution with thyme was what I put in there, ground thyme. This is oregano. Always carry a pocket knife with you. I prefer the utility razor blade, very handy in a lot of situations. Anyways, got your oregano. I'm also going to add some cinnamon, ground cinnamon, and rosemary, and a good chunk of salt, a lot of salt. Now, each of those spices is an anti-mold agent. Vinegar is acidic, which again suppresses and kills mold, and salt, of course, is a desiccant. Basically, it draws all of the moisture out of the mold cells through hyperosmosis and basically breaks the cell walls as they prune up. So all of these items, ingredients here, are going to contribute to an environment that is basically hostile to mold spores like yeast and the other things that tend to be what causes problems on bread. Now, a lot of bread molds aren't actually that dangerous, but a few of them do create some toxins that you really don't want in you, especially because they often accumulate over time. And that's a very important thing to consider is accumulative effects. So in this run through, I'm trying to grind up some of those spices a little bit, but in the next go through, I'm actually already soaking the vinegar and other ingredients in a mason jar in the fridge to get a good solution going. Basically, what I'm doing is soaking the essential oils from these powders into the vinegar and salt solution, and then coffee filtering the solids out to give myself a nice little vinegar and spice treatment to spray on the crumbed bread that I'm baking the moisture out of right now. Now, the main reason that I'm baking the bread first is because I plan to crumb it to expose as much surface area as possible to the spraying when I do that process, and then to bake it again to once again remove that moisture from the vinegar out of the bread. In future processes, I'm going to try to shred the bread using a food processor or a cheese grater in some way to skip the thrice baking process and just spray the bread right away and then bake everything out of it all at once. As it stands, especially with the bread piled up the way that I had it, and even with it in just these large chunks. It's pretty amazing how quickly the outside of any given chunk of bread will dry out, leaving the inside of the chunk warm and moist still. And for this process to work, it's absolutely vital that we remove as much moisture as physically possible from all of the bread, because any moisture left in there is a little bit of supplement for some mold and yeast spores to take root and start growing while this sits in storage. This entire process is going to hinge on having everything treated a little bit with some acid and mold inhibiting compounds and absolutely dry and then packaged in the mylar bags with oxygen absorbers to make sure that they have nothing to try to catch hold with, and then stored in a cool place so that they don't have the warmth that they need to kindle. So I'm going to try this again later. The reason that I'm scrapping this batch is twofold. I cut my finger sort of badly early in the bread cutting process, and everything that you've seen here is after I took care of that. But it bled through the band-aid and through the holes that the breadcrumbs had torn in my gloves, and I ended up contaminating part of this batch. So I tossed it. And then I realized that the gloves, which I have, which these ones are actually sort of old, have a little bit of a plasticky smell to them. I don't think they're powdered or anything, but I was worried about contaminating the batch with these gloves. So I'm going to get new ones that are definitely food grade and try again. I really didn't waste any money on this. I bought some of these spices fresh, but I don't really consider that waste because aside from this use, they're just going to be used in regular food dishes. And the bread was free, so while there was some food waste, it's less than what gets wasted with this bread on a normal weekend when the homeless shelter doesn't come to pick it up. So I'm going to try again with some more free bread later tonight, and we'll see how this goes. I actually really think that this process taught me a lot in what to do next time, and I'm going to streamline it. So please stay tuned with that. Now, this last little bit is just something that I'm thinking of dabbling in. I want to mess around with melting silver, pretty much for fun, although there could be a few reasonable uses in a collapse type situation, or things that preppers might like to do. So I went on Walmart, the app, and found a clearance item of a nice little crucible and metal melting kit. It only cost me a few bucks because it was on clearance, and I thought it'd be fun just to sink my teeth into, even though I don't really expect it to be of high quality. It'll at least give me an idea of where I want to start and where I want to go for here. Uh, I always approach new hobbies experimentally and realize that there's going to be a lot of failure before I figure out what I'm doing. So I try not to get too serious at first. For instance, I don't have too much faith in this little clay crucible. I know I'm going to have to glaze it and treat it real well to keep it from cracking. But this came with a pair of tongs, a crucible, and a couple of graphite molds, along with a couple of graphite stirring sticks. So stay tuned with that to see me probably mess up in my first attempts at messing around with molten metal. So that should be fun. Anyways, I hope that was interesting, guys. Stay tuned on both fronts for my experiments in both of these regards. I hope it's interesting, and I hope you'll stick around. Stay safe out there, everyone.